Good evening and welcome. I'm honored to open the second event of the Poetry Place International Festival, celebrating the International Poetry Day, which is today. My name is Gilad Meiri, and I'm part of the literary committee of the festival with Atara Ben Hanan and Noah Shakarji. You may say hello. Yeah. I'm very happy to introduce טינו מושוקוביץ, winning award poet and translator of Russian poetry and researcher, and he also is a teacher in the College of Literary Arts of the Poetry Place, and a good friend of ours. And he edited the Poetica, Nanopoetica 21, which was dedicated to Russian poetry. It was published between 1970 and 2020. And part of this celebration of this Nanopoetica magazine, we are very happy to have us tonight Michael Gurnas, the poet Michael Gurnas, the poetess Alexandra Ptrova, and the poet Vodimitrij Kuzmin. And just before I pass the microphone to טינו, just a technical note. The microphones are going to be muted during the event, but we may dedicate a few minutes at the end for your questions, and you may write them down at the chat box. And if there are questions, and if the flow is okay, טינו, I'll let you know about these questions so you can be free to have a flowing conversation. And טינו, the microphone is yours, and have a blessed evening.
Thank you, Gilad. Thank you, Noah and Atara. Thank you for the festival. Thank you for having us. I will try to say I will try not to talk too much and leave the stage to the poets we're hosting. Just a few words of the anthology. The anthology was kind of an attempt to draw a first sketch, of course, for a portrait of Russian poetry, contemporary Russian poetry, of the last half century, something like that. It was very difficult because contemporary Russian poets weren't almost translated. Almost no one was translated to Hebrew. So the anthology has 47 poets and some kind of 150 texts. And I want to thank the other translators, Aminadav Dikman, Ronen Sonis, Dina Markon, Tzvi Khazanov, that also contributed. And of course, it's only the tip of the iceberg, because Russian poetry is vast. And we can say there's nothing new under the sun. Russia is politically unstable, or too stable, maybe, some say, a little bit. It has wonderful, solid literature and great poets, some of whom are immigrants. Nothing changes. So 3 of them are here with us tonight. We're going to talk a bit, read some poetry in Russian and Hebrew, and then maybe try to leave some time for questions. I want to start, please, with Alexandra. If you could be so kind to introduce yourself a little bit, and then I want us to read your poem, the second one. Alexandra.
Alexandra, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself, please.
It's okay?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
No, I'm not very expert with all these things. So first of all, I'm very grateful to the organizers, and I'm really caught by surprise. But anyway, it's please take my very. I would like to express my gratitude for choosing me and to be here. And I'm Alexandra Ptrova, as you said. I was born in St. Petersburg. Actually Leningrad still. It was Leningrad, and then I moved actually to Israel in 1993, and I lived there for about 6 years. And then I moved again to Italy, and I settled in Rome, where I live now for more than 21 years. So, but I continue always to write in Russian. It's maybe it's strange, but anyway, it's it became my home. Actually, just real my home. I published 3 books of poetry and some prose and essays, and then I published in 2016, I'm sorry, still in the past, the novel called Appendix. It was actually, maybe it was very strange for the poet that actually used to write just a very short poems, actually generally short poems, and this novel takes about 800 pages, even more. So yeah, it was a surprise even for me. So and now I'm preparing the next the book of prose, and also hope of poetry.
Great, thank you. And I think we'll read the poem now. The last one you sent us.
The last one. It's both poems that, both poems. It's from my second book, actually published very many years ago. It was published in 2000. So I will read the second poem, right? Because the first one, in the screen we see,
yes.
Yeah, okay. Россия, мамаша слепая, твой ямщик, я в тебе замерзаю. В белоглазых озерах замерзшая рыба горит, лес в снега с головою зашит. В чусучом горле Орфея чаще песни, где классных трясина бурлит. Флорентийский бродяга, пастушонок Давид, подавились бы ею. Отпусти ты меня по красивым полям, проводи в Зангран лето. Я вернусь, я найду тебя, буду ходить по дворам, буду в окна стучать. Русь, Мисюсь, где ты?
Thank you. And now in Hebrew. רוסיה, מאמה עיוורת, עגלונך הניכר בך כקרח, הדגה הקפואה בוערה לך בלובן עיני הימות, והיער נתפר בבטנת השלגים במלואו. בגרון האורפאי הוא גרון שיראים, סבך השיר, שם מכל התנועות ביבוע הטין. הבטלן מפירנצה, דוד, הרועה הקטין, היו בוודאי נחנקים מכאלה שירים. התיריני לצאת לשדות היפים, אל הקיץ החולה לביני, ואשוב בעתיד למוצאך, ועטור כל חצר וקרפיף, אתדפק על כל תריס וחלון, ארץ רוס, ארץ עוץ, עניני.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now, let's talk a little bit. I wanted to ask all 3 of you, but firstly you, let's start with this. What does it mean for you to be a poet? firstly, and then what is it like to be a Russian poet?
Russian poet, okay. It's quite hard to consider this question objectively, okay.
For sure, that's why we're asking you.
Yeah, probably for me, being a Russian poet implies a readiness to serve through my life and personality, expressing myself through words, in this common place that called Russian literature. We could call it literature in general, and even more broadly, precisely, an expression of human spirit. And this involves not deviating from one's truth. And this truth has to do with educating oneself like a vessel that listens and observes. And when it reaches a certain degree of concentration and patience, can become a messenger. And poetry and writing in general, for me, are also linked to conscience. I need to be in tune with my own to write. It's something like that.
So there's a difference between a poet and a Russian poet.
I've never been not Russian poet, so but I think there is some difference. Yes, I think there is some difference because now I used to know a lot of. Actually, I knew also some English poets, and also I know many Italian poets. I think it's something different, but it's quite difficult for me from inside to speak about.
Yeah, okay. It's understandable. Maybe Michael can answer that question. Michael teaches in New Hampshire, right?
Yes, in New Hampshire at Dartmouth College. Yeah.
So
the question is, what does it mean for me being a poet or Russian?
Being a poet and a Russian poet, and what is the difference?
Being a Russian poet is a more difficult question. I don't think I even have an answer. I don't see much difference between being a Russian or non-Russian poet. But being a poet, I don't, since I don't write much and don't publish much, it's not much such a big part of my identity, I think. But at this moment when it is a part of my identity, when I feel myself a poet, then for me probably the closest, the definition of poetry which is closest to my heart is that of craft. I think when I feel that I'm a poet and I feel that I belong to this basically crafts, to the group of craftsmen, and sort of belong to this brotherhood and sisterhood of people who practice this craft. And in this sense, it doesn't even matter whether there are good practitioners or bad practitioners. This is subjective. So I just feel this sort of affinity of practice, of mastery. And for me, this is basically, indeed, not metaphorically, very similar to a craft. So I feel that I'm part of this sort of antiquated, exotic nowadays craft, which used to be much more important, still exists. And
less important now.
Oh, definitely, yes. It was more important before the advent of writing.
Mm-hmm.
And definitely before the advent of things like the internet. But yeah, so for me, it's more of a sort of shared practical disposition. And as for being a Russian poet, well, there is this Russian specifics. So I'm also a scholar to an extent, and there is this old myth of Russia being literary centric, etc. But there is something to it, and there is a little bit of a proof. There is a Russian website called Stikhi.ru, where people publish about 7,000 poems per day. which is, I think, a giant number of poems being produced in Russia, which is a bit of an experimental sort of proof of this old claim that Russia is somehow focused on poetry. But as far as feeling myself, it's just this particular tradition, and so I'm part of it. I don't feel there is anything specific about being a Russian poet.
And it's a follow-up question. There's the whole tradition on your shoulders. Do you think of yourself, do you think of your place in this tradition? Where do you belong? Or do you judge yourself? Do you try to explain to yourself, where do you stand?
Is it a question to me? Or?
Yeah.
Oh, of course. How can it be otherwise? We are in poetry. We are nothing but tradition. I feel that. I think as all of us, as Sasha and Dima, we feel that we're part of it. That we need to fight against it. There is this ambivalence of being hostile towards tradition and being a continuation of a tradition. And definitely.
Okay, let's read a poem of yours, maybe two, because you have four and the others two, so we'll start with two of yours. Which do you prefer?
Of course.
You can choose.
Let's do this one. Иди за мной, когда земля в зените, твоих занятий, твоих событий, редеет лес, прибой ослабевает, с тобой соединения не бывает, но и разлуки тоже не предвидим. Тобой любим, тобой ненавидим, тобой забыт, и стало быть зарыт фундамент твоего ночного дома. Я снова рядом, ты не упадешь. Иди за мной, не зная, что ведомый, не зная, что идешь.
בוא אחריי כשבזנית אדמת כוכב הלכת, כשחורש מועדיך מדלדל, וכששוכחת נביאת השיבולות של עיסוקיך. דבר הרי לא מתחבר אליך, אך גם ההיפרדות ממך כבר לא הולכת. אהוב עליך ושנוא עליך, שכוח על ידך על כן שקוע, בבטון מסד הבית הלילי שלך. אני שוב כאן, כדי שדבר לא יפילך. לך אחריי בלי הכרה בכך כי איני מובילך, בעצם פעולת ההליכה. Okay, let's do another one.
Yeah. Thank you very much. A friend of mine who teaches, is a professor in Slavic studies in Hebrew, University of Jerusalem, told me that your translation sounds more beautiful than my original.
Thank you.
He's in this room, by the way.
Funny.
Осень, сломанный мир на обочине стынет, никто не починит, никто не поправит оси, просто сиди и поддакивай, пока тебе разглагольствуют родство и сиротство и дарят друг другу подарки.
Классное стихотворение вообще. סתיו, העולם עומד משובש, בצד, איש לא ייגש להחליף מסיו, סתם תהנהן ממוכן, כל עוד יתמות בקרבת דם, מלהגות עליך וגם מעניקות זו לזו אתנן. יאללה, נמשיך בשיחה. תור מי עכשיו? תור דימה, תור דמיטרי. So what do you think about tradition?
Well, no, first of all, I would like to say, referring to the question of being a Russian poet, by the way, that the answer is heavily dependent on the language you are asking this question in. Because in Russian, we have two different words, русский and российский, which is equally translated into English as Russian. Российский is Russian in the sense of relating somehow to a state, a country, a land. While русский, it's a bit more complicated story. It might relate to something ethnic. It might relate to something cultural. it might relate to something linguistic. So I used to think, when I was young, that being a Russian poet means writing in Russian. To a certain degree, I keep thinking this way. But it was even not like yesterday, it was years and years ago, when I have met people, poets, insisted that they are not Russian poets, although they write in Russian. That they are Jewish and Israeli poets writing in Russian. Or they are Belarus, there's a bit complicated word as well, but it's another story. Poets from Belarus writing in Russian, but not Russian poets. Maybe I would disagree with all these people, but there is a problematic point, you know? So I'm definitely a Russian poet in the sense that I write Russian, in Russian. But who knows, maybe I'm American poet writing in Russian. When my generation was only entering Russian poetry in 90s, our haters used to say exactly this, that these are new poets and they are essentially American poets, just happened to write in Russian. They have nothing in common with Russian tradition. That is not true, because rejecting tradition is a way to refer to tradition, right?
What American poetry those people knew when they called you American poet?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
But thinking about it myself, I ask myself, maybe I'm trying to become a Russian Frank O'Hara. Maybe I'm trying to become a Russian Charles Reznikov. Maybe not. Is it possible? Is there a place for a Frank O'Hara in Russian poetry? I don't know. So I mean that in a sense, it is a useful skill to relate not only to your own national tradition, but also for as many other national traditions as you can. I cannot say I'm so successful in pursuing this task, but in an ideal world, and if I was going to live forever, obviously I would like to be American poet writing in Russian and Latvian poet writing in Russian. I'm living in Latvia currently, and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. But then again, we have had a great Russian poet, Dmitry Alexandrovich Prigov, who once wrote a poem about it, that if I would, in like loose English translation, he wrote like something like this: if I would live in ancient Rome, I would be a Hokusai, Japanese painter. Mm-hmm. But if I would live in Japan, I would be Catullus. So maybe that's the best thing said about a question of poetry tradition ever.
Well, thank you for your answer. Sounds a little bit Ezra Pound, with Chinese and all the languages, reading poetry in each poet in its own language. Let's pick up the subject and talk a bit about you. You said you're living in Latvia, and maybe you'll tell us a little bit about yourself. What brought you there, and how did you get there? And
it's about being Russian as well.
That's why.
Because I moved from Russia to Latvia 7 years ago after Ukrainian war. My main idea was that it is the way to stop being responsible in any aspect for what the country named Russia is doing. Because now I can tell to anybody, and especially to my colleagues from Ukraine, I translate Ukrainian poetry a lot, so I know many authors from that country, that I'm in no way responsible anymore for the state named Russia. I'm not Russian anymore in this aspect. It's not about being somehow persecuted personally. I was not. And I guess
maybe it's a little bit insulting also.
yeah, and I guess I wouldn't say that Russian poets are so much like persecuted or like hunted in present day Russia. Russian state mostly doesn't care about poets. Well, there are some exceptions, but not that important. But it's only, it's only by chance. So any person in Russia can be persecuted at any moment for any reason. It's a kind of lottery. I don't like lotteries. I am pretty sure many of my colleagues would follow me if they had an opportunity. It just happened that I had. It's a problem a bit for me, because in fact, I can say that I'm maybe much more known within the Russian literary community, not due to my poems, but rather to my articles, to my translations, and to my publishing projects. To my magazine, to the book series I published, to anthologies I have compiled, and so on. And all these things are a bit more difficult to do being abroad. As distinct from writing. Writing, it's universal thing, you can do it everywhere. But still there are some pluses. I can run poetry festival in Latvia, and I invite Russian poets to take part in it. It's a plus.
Yeah, sounds like a good job. So let's read a poem of yours, so people will know you for your poems and not for your publishing.
Which one you would want me to start?
With? Whatever you want.
No difference, yeah.
Let's see what Atara puts on the screen.
Okay, why not? This is, in fact, a very old poem of mine, and honestly, I cannot imagine how it can be translated, because there is a key word in it, Kostroma, which is first and foremost a city in Russia, but also it is a name of an ancient pagan goddess, which is, a play of word impossible in any other language. Also, there is some quotations in this poem from Joseph Brodsky and so on, which is, I guess, also unrecognizable in any other language. Still, well, I guess somehow it might work anyway.
It works a little bit differently. A little bit, but...
As any translation.
Yeah.
I understand. Кострома, где мальчики не ходят в шортах, девочки тоже не очень ходят, значит, там маленьких татуировок на икрах невозможно увидеть, и воздух там недвижен в Костроме, где мальчики на загорелых икрах татуировок маленьких не делают, а разве на предплечье те, другие, не те, и ходят в майках, открывая, и девочки лишь руки, а не ноги, но нет, они и рук не открывают, вернее, да, но разве только чуть выше локтя, а руки сильные у этих мальчиков, привыкших править, словно возница, широкие приплечья, и плечи круглые, но их не видно. Вот если только поглядеть в окно, где свет не гаснет в самом дальнем доме, наедине с собой, там обнажают плечи, икры, бедра, тропинку робкую волос, стремительно мощнеющую к низу. Ах, боже мой, в последнем доме, там, где мальчики не ходят, гаснет свет, все спят в Костроме, еще вчера веселой.
בעיר קוסטרומה אשר בסירוסיה הבנים לא לובשים מכנסיים קצרים וגם הבנות לא, לכן לא תראה שם קעקועים קטנים על השוקיים והאוויר שם לא יזוז אף פעם בקוסטרומה אשר בסירוסיה. שם הבנים לא יעשו קעקועים קטנים על השוקיים שהשמש הזפן, אלא אולי על הזרועות, רק לא האלה הקודמים, אלא האחרים האלה הולכים בגופיות, חושפים גם הבנות אגב את הידיים ואת הרגליים לא, בעצם גם את הידיים לא, בעצם כן, אך רק עד המרפק, וידיהם של הבנים האלה חזקות, בנים שרגילים למשול ולהנהיג כמו עגלונים, זרועות גדולות ורחבות יש לבנים האלה, והכתפיים שלהם הגלגלות, אך לא רואים אותן, רק במקרה שמציצים אל החלון שבו האור אינו כבה, ושם, בחדר, בבניין הכי רחוק, לבד רק עם עצמם, חושפים את הכתפיים, השוקיים והירכיים, חושפים שובל שיער נבוך שמתקשח בקצהו באחת, אך אלוהים שם בבניין האחרון, היכן שהבנים כבר לא מסתובבים, קווי האור, כולם נחים בקוסטרומה, שעד אתמול הייתה מקום שמח. Toda, thank you for the poem. Let's continue our talk, if you please. Just a second. Let's continue maybe with politics because Dmitry has risen the subject. I want to ask maybe Alexandra, how does the political climate in Russia affect your writing?
I'm very depressed on the political climate in Russia, terribly depressed. And what could I say? And actually, I was depressed on it. Not now. It's not begun from now, but many years ago. So. I cannot call myself a writer or poet outside of politics. I think even if I don't speak about narrow situation, particular narrow situation, and actually you can't be outside of politics, I think, and even if you don't write directly about arrests, you're still in it. And they will still be present in your text somehow. And of course, it must be always some correspondence between your ideas, words, and actions. And I admire actually Dima's positions and what he said and what he did. Maybe I was lucky that I left Russia. I don't know, lucky or not, but anyway, I left Russia in 1993, many years ago. But when I used to come in 2000, actually, what is going now, I felt that it's already happened. So I don't. Maybe people didn't see it from inside, but from outside, I felt it very well.
And do you feel an actual obligation to deal with it daily?
No, I don't feel any obligation, but
ethical, I mean.
I think, yeah, I feel very ashamed about what has happened now. But I, of course, I speak about what is going on, not just in Russia, in the world in general. And for example, in my novel appendix, I spoke about the situation, also political situation in general, about immigration, for example, not just in Russia. Not obligated, not of course, but yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. Let's read the second one, the second poem, maybe.
Yeah, it's the poem I wrote about 33 years ago. So very.
Still sounds great.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So, just a minute. I find it. You have here, or I'm sorry, I'm just looking on the book, okay. Милый человек, я не знаю твоего языка. Яблоко падает за облака, ждем дождя. Вот уж которую ночь мы провожаем друг друга. Не до смерти любим, но до поливальных машин, до солнца, повернутого в профиль к югу. Все больше простора внутри этих стен. Вот опять последняя книжная полка сегодня открылась прозрачной. Но дружество наше так темно и зыбко, как правописание ять. Ты слово сказал, я не понял его, хоть, наверное, оно и удачно. Оборваны шторы, распахнуты двери, рука лишь наспех задержана в рукопожатии. Куда там? Ты тоже событие, взметнувшаяся мука, сквозняк, и некому ставить заплаты.
תודה. Thank you. אני לא מדברת ולא מבינה את שפתכם. הפירות מתרסקים מעבר לסף המרום. יושבים, מחכים שהגשם יבוא. נפרדים שוב ושוב, ממשיכים לאהוב לא עד מוות, רק עד פינוי הפחים. עד הרגע שבו צדודיתו של השמש נפנית לדרום. הנה יש פה מקום ויותר מרווח פה, ושוב, אחרון מדפי הספרים מתרווח, פעור ושקוף. אך הקשר בינינו נזיל כמו ביטוי שנשכח זה מכבר. אמרתם מילים מוצלחות כנראה, ואני לא הבנתי דבר. הדלתות פעורות ונתלש הווילון, בחישוק אצבעות, כף היד משתהה רק לרגע בתוך הלחיצה הנפסדת. גם אתם מתאבחים כמו הקמח של ההתרחשות. אתם רוח פרצים, אבל מי יאטום את הסדק?
Thank you. I actually want to say one thing, that the first phrase, «Милый человек, я не знаю твоего языка», we spoke about politics. It's actually was a phrase of that Mikhail Gorbachev said, and it was like a funny quotation. Yeah, he said one of the one. I don't remember. Dima, do you remember this phrase?
Of course not. But by the way, I have a question for our brilliant translator. How was the word "ять" translated?
Oh yeah, right.
It looks impossible.
Yeah. No, it's of course it's impossible. It was an idiomatic translation. I just changed it to something something different. Let's see, what did I do with it? It's like a saying long forgotten.
Because actually it is a name of an old letter in the Russian alphabet, expelled from the alphabet 100 years ago.
Yeah,
it's impossible to translate it like this.
Absolutely.
I just used a saying of forgetting a saying, like a saying that was forgotten long ago, went out of the language. That was my...
On this note, how did you deal with misuse in the end of Alexandra's?
Okay, that's an interesting question. Chekhov is not really... this particular story wasn't translated, I guess. So I changed it to Eretz Rus, Eretz Uts. It's the country of Rus and the country of Uts. Uts is from the Bible and from the children's book, The Wizard from Oz. But the name of the country or name of the state is from the Bible, and it also symbolizes something lost and that couldn't be found, something like the childhood lost in Chekhov's story. That's it. That's what I. Thank you.
Very
So,
cool.
thank you. Now we're with Misha, with Michael. I wanted to ask you. You said that poetry is not as important as it was. Does it impact reality somehow, and how?
Does poetry impact reality?
Yes.
Today?
Yes.
You mean the political reality?
That's it.
Hopefully it impacts some of our personal realities. If we still love poems, they may sometimes feel us better, make feel us better, or you know, so there's some cognitive therapeutic effects, but I highly doubt poetry impacts sort of social reality. It never has done this. I agree with Auden. Poetry exists in the valley of its own making.
Mm-hmm.
But our lived reality, if we love poems, of course it's impacted. We all know about it. Otherwise, it wouldn't exist.
Yeah, I think if I may answer, like I think that poetry has a special job now in our days when the language is narrow. The poetry, I don't know, it's like a tool to make the language broader and to broaden up our vision of the world.
Or vice versa. I agree and disagree with you. I don't think we need to broaden anything. It's too broad now. But poetry may be, and that's an utopia, maybe one of the instruments, since our attention has been destroyed by the new media, poetry is sort of anti-internet. Poetry is something you do and consume alone and in a concentrated state. So poetry could be a sort of a magical tool we inherited from our ancestors, which will help us maybe defend our brains a little bit.
I will take it. So let's read the two poems we haven't read yet of yours. Let's see. Good.
Трубку никто не берет, а как она там орет, надрывается, представляешь, а никто. Собственно, я звонил сказать именно то, что сказала трубка. 4, 6, 8, 12 звуков, не отличных один от другого. Один не важнее другого, только это, ничего другого.
אף אחד לא עונה, והטלפון צורח שם, מתענה, אבל אף אחד. בעצם צלצלתי במיוחד, להגיד בדיוק את מה שהטלפון אמר. 4, 6, 8, 12 צלילים. זהים זה לזה, לא שונים אחד מהאחר. אף אחד מהם לא משמעותי מהאחר. רק את זה ושום דבר אחר.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the last one?
Не люби, не целуй никого, не веди никогда, не веди, когда ты лежишь в коробке, ты дрожишь налегке в холода. Вот болит, вот устал, но уста, это рот, да и тот, еще то говорит, еще та пустота, и осадок с труда. То ли рыба на суше, то ли голос в воде, не надо, не слушай.
I love that poem. אל תרצי, אל תרצי, אל תהיי לי עם איש ואישה, אל תשקי פה לאיש, אל תביאי אף פעם לשום נקודה ומקום, את שורדת לבד בקופסת הקרטון, את רועדת ולא לבושה. קצת כואב, קצת עייפה הלשון, היא הפה, היא שפיה, לא שפויה, משופעה, לא בוררת, אומרת דברים, והריק איזה ריק ומשקע, ועכשיו מה הדג הזה ביבשה, אל תקשיבי ואל תשמעי את תפשט הקולות הקשה. So let's leave. We have some time yet, right? Atara? Yeah. I wanted to ask. Sorry.
May I add just a little bit to our previous conversation?
Of course, of course.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something that when we talked about politics and being a Russian poet, I think there's absolutely nothing specific about being a Russian poet. It's an arbitrary, random thing. But I would say that I'm very proud of being a Russian, if I happen to be a Russian poet. So that, I would rather think of myself as a Russian poet living in America than an American writing in Russian. So for me, yeah, I'm thankful to the tradition, and if I am part of it, I'm proud of it.
There's a great Russian tradition of immigrant poets also, so it's part of it. Let's talk a little bit about the craft. How do you know that the poem is good, or it was worth the effort? Misha? Why not? We'll continue with you and then pass the question to Dima.
So I can, how do I know that my poem is good?
Yeah.
Well, for me, it's a little bit of an evolutionary adaptive thing. So I am an evolutionist. So I think if a poem survives, or this sort of phonetic pre-poem survives in the competition with other pieces of language in my mind, which may be taking, like in my case, decades, then there is a chance that it will survive in other people's minds. And because there is a sort of, not even metaphorical, I think there is an evolutionary process. There is a sort of fitness competition for the resources of memory and attention.
And then you don't write down things that just come to your mind, that maybe will become poems, and then they're just there, and you can just take them and make. It's like ready a TV dinner of sorts that is ready in your notebook. I don't know. Do you do it?
I don't have notebooks, but I'm just very messy, and if I had a notebook, I would have lost it immediately. So.
Dmitry, can you please join?
Well, there are two parts in my answer. On the one hand, I'm dealing with the poems written by other people, like every day, as a full-time job. Translating, editing, compiling, doing this, doing that. So, I mean, practically, it means as a consequence that I write only the things I am absolutely sure nobody else can do for some reason. The reasons themselves might be not that like important, but I know for sure that this is on my and only my like experience of you or anything. I do it quite rare, in fact, like maybe as rare as Michael, though, for different reasons. And that is easy in my case, because I know that literally everything good that might be written by somebody else will be written by somebody else. I don't need to care. And after that, dealing all the time with other people's poem, I can deal with my own poems exactly the same way. There's no difference.
But you compare, of course.
Of course.
Okay. That's I needed to make sure that you're normal. Let's read another poem of yours.
It's a rather old one as well, but much simpler than the previous one. And when I was in the beginning of my way, like 25 years ago, it seemed a bit important to write simple things in simple way, because it is not the thing Russian poetry is accustomed to. Высокого парня в черной майке бьет крупная дрожь. Спасаясь от нежданного ливня, вскочил в троллейбус. Пупырышки на смуглых руках. От них чуть заметные выгоревшие волоски. Заметней. Если его погладить по стриженной слишком коротко голове, бить будет в лицо. Молча стою рядом. Выходит. Вижу в окно. Идет нарочито медленно. Ливень. Ливень.
I think it's a wonderful poem. That's why I included it in the anthology, because it has something that no other poems have, as you, of course, already know. הבחור הגבוה בגופייה השחורה רועד כולו, דילג לאוטובוס בבת אחת, נס על נפשו מהמבול, ידיים שזופות מצטמררות, מצא דקיק של שערות שנצרבו בשמש, הן סגורות עכשיו, היא מלטפת פדחתו, המסופרת הוא ישר ייתן לי אגרוף בפנים, עומד לידו בשקט, הוא יורד, רואה בחלון, הליכה איטית מאוסה, מבול, מבול. Thank you. Maybe now some questions from the audience. If the audience has some questions.
If you have questions, you can write them at the chat box down below.
No, so I'll ask mine. Do we still have time?
Yes, we have like 5 more minutes.
Okay, 5 minutes. Editing, and I will be glad if you all answer this question. What is your relationship with editing your own poems? And do you do it? And for how long do you continue editing a poem? Alexandra, you can start.
Oh, okay. But what do you mean on editing, about editing? Rewriting text or
You're rewriting your text. How long do you work on a text? And do you come back to it, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks after, and still keep changing and changing?
Mm-hmm. Okay, sometimes I used to rewrite text a lot. Sometimes it just came and it just comes. So it depends. And also the previous question that you asked about, one, do you understand that poem is okay, no? When it's finished, more or less, it's about that, no? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's kind of music that inside of me helps me to understand it's finished and kind of be beautiful, but it could be also ugly, but it's a beauty, special beauty that I feel, and so I feel it finished. And sometimes I have to go along before I understand it. It's okay what I see. It's like a platonic thing that I see, but I have to achieve, and yeah, more or less. But sometimes some of the poems, of course, when the poem that you publish in anthology, maybe it's nice and maybe I love it many years ago, but now I think it's kind of a bit childish. So I wouldn't write it now, no? So, and then editing also that relationship with other people. I mean, for the in prose, and it is very important. Somebody reads you, and editing is extremely important. But in poetry, I haven't had to deal with editing by others. So it just by myself. It's quite. It's not easy.
Yeah. Dmitry?
I don't think I have something interesting to say about it. Usually, if I cannot finish poem at once, it will never be finished. Just I can throw it away. I will never be back to it. But as long as I translate a lot, I know how to edit text, you know, a poetic text, but it's something different. Translations, poetry translations are subject to be edited.
Yeah.
Poems, maybe not, I don't know.
Mikhail, Misha?
Yeah, I agree with Sasha and Dima. For me, it's a continuous process, which but I do it so rarely indeed that it's difficult to generalize for me. But yes, I think I don't have editing, so I don't edit because there is nothing but editing.
And when you have to compile a poetry book, you do it by yourself, of course. You don't need help of other editors. Or, I don't know. I'm asking.
But that's rarely the case with poetry.
Yeah.
We are probably not the most typical poets in this aspect, you know, because all the three of us are not writing extensively, not writing a lot of poems.
That's
Those
okay.
ones who write a lot work completely different way about it.
It's a little bit not Russian not to write a lot, because Russian poets usually write a lot. I don't know, there's a special climate of working on your poetry, of going, writing something. It's very Brodsky a little bit, but that's great not to write if you don't need to, if you don't see the need.
It's just about having different demigods as a like role models, you know. Tuchev wrote very little amount of poems, and you remember, вот эта книжка небольшая, томов при многих тяжелей. This small book is heavier than great volumes. It was said about this Russian poet of 19th century. So it might be different.
T.S. Eliot, he wrote like 90 poems or something in his life.
Tina, can you please ask the question of Jonathan, or maybe Jonathan wants to ask it? Jonathan Berg?
Yeah, I will ask it. First of all, I want to say thank you to Makом Leshira, and thank you for טינו for bringing us, you know, such a big part of Russian poetry that was missing, because we have a lot of translation of the previous generation, but we have, until now, we didn't have enough from the previous contemporary writing. And I wanted to ask you about that. I wanted to ask you about your relationship and the way you approach this heavy shade of Russian poetry, you know, the Tsvetaeva and Akhmatova and Mandelstam and Brodsky, and I can keep on saying names, but there's such strong Russian poetry that's been written, and I'm curious to know what is your relationship with them? Do you feel like you have an argument, or you suggest a different poetic approach? Do you feel in ways that you keep on doing their work or being influenced by them? Do you ignore them? What is your relationship with the previous generations in Russian poetry?
Seems to me, by the way, that it's funny that all of the whole, a good deal of this discussion is going around this question of tradition and ancestors and heritage and so on. I'll
tell you why. I'll tell you why. Sorry, I'll tell you why. Because in Israel now, it's like we say, a burning question in the poetry. Because there was the mainstream wasn't like this, and now something awakens again, and more people feel that poetry is a craft and not only just a way to express yourself. Like it's I don't know. It's very Western. Right? And Russian is a calling, like a Russian poetry is a calling. You need to do it because you have a calling to write poetry. So we have this conversation now in Israel. That's why people ask these questions. People are interested.
But there is no contradiction here, because obviously poetry is a craft. But any craft is so, changing thing. If it's not like a folk craft, proud to be the same through centuries and centuries. All the other craft is now very, very different from what it used to be a century ago. There's no problem in it. Second thing, it is, I would dare to say that seeing a tradition as a whole thing is a very out-of-date approach. Because in fact, since the beginning of modernism, we have not the tradition, but traditions. And they are so numerous in every big national literature that any newcomer is absolutely free to compile his or her own canon, his or her own set of figures, strategies, and tools to follow. So, of course, I have my own tradition behind me. But many great Russian poets of the past wouldn't belong to it. I love Mandelstam or Tsvetaeva. I can quote them occasionally, even in my poems. But my poetics is not based on their heritage, like in no way. On the other hand, I feel much more obliged to, say, Mikhail Kuzmin on the one hand and Vladislav Khodasevich on the other hand, and some more obscure to a foreign reader figures of the mid-20th century like Evgeny Kharitonov. I don't think he's translated into many languages. It's natural. So all of us have a tradition, a kind of tradition, a certain tradition behind us, but it is not the same.
But there are canons, world canons that.
Who cares?
No, I'm just saying that you don't need to invent the wheel over and over again. Not you, I mean
of course. But on the other hand, if you are talking about a world canon, it is a good and well-esteemed job of transferring the inventions of a foreign tradition into your own language and culture.
Exactly.
So I'm not ashamed to be kind of Russian Frank O'Hara.
So, טינו, you opened a really wide spectrum of discussion just 2 minutes before the end. It's like,
Sorry.
no, it's okay. It's great. We just started to move, you know, but we're just about to end this interesting session. And, טינו, maybe you want to conclude and maybe you want to say something before we move on?
No, I just want to I just want to thank the participants, and I don't want to close. I just want to open the conversation and continue talking somehow.
Right.
Okay. So I really want to thank you all. Thank you, Michael and Dmitry and Alexandra and טינו, from being with us. It's a very short time, 1 hour. It's really impossible to get to know you. So this is why we have the Nanopoetica. You have the literary magazine. You can read the poems there. And I want to invite you to be with us tomorrow at 6 p.m. with a special event in honor of the publishing of the Gavin Ewart collection that I translated. And Ewart is not with us for the last 25 years, what can I say? So we're going to talk with his daughter and with Stephen Delchamps, who did a research of Ewart's poetry. And because he's such an unknown but a great poet, we have a chance to get close, maybe to touch his spirit. And I want to thank Atara and thank Noah and Ayel Tashachar, and I want to thank you all for being with us. And happy spring. This is the first day of spring. So enjoy the flowers and enjoy the allergies. And we'll be here tomorrow evening. Thank you very much.